Members of the State Shadow Cabinet gathered in Port Macquarie today to show the party's opposition to the hospital issue. Opposition leader Bob Carr claimed the residents of the area are being used as a laboratory experiment for the government's health privatisation policies.
And this is the first attempt by the Fay government to take off part of the hospital system and to flog it off to private investors. We happen to be saying that's wrong. That's going to deny people access to the hospital system their taxes pay for.
Mr Carr challenged Premier Fay to fight out the issue in public before the referendum on the issue on September the 19th. He said an explanation is due on why Port Macquarie will become the only area in Australia where a private company will have a monopoly on hospital services. The opposition leader claimed a Labor government would build a new public hospital in Port Macquarie in its first term.
There is a positive alternative to selling off the public hospital at Port Macquarie, and that is to build, to complete quickly a publicly owned and operated hospital.
"90 delegates at a Metal Trades Industry Association conference are hearing how members are winning several battles on the trade front. Both sides of the political spectrum are committed in differing degrees to an open economy within the next 5 years. That means an Australian manufacturing sector with either none or greatly reduced tariff protection, competing on what's been termed a level playing field. Some believe there'll be more of a scorched earth effect where companies simply won't be able to compete against a flood of imports. But rather than being trapped with their backs to the wall, some Newcastle companies seem to be spearheading the fight for survival.
We're leading the way in Australia for enterprise bargaining with some 12 agreements registered locally. Exports are up, efficiencies and productivities from our members from the straw poll we've done are up across the board.
For some, profits are up from 25 to 500%. Locally produced goods are making the grade in global competition. After drastic job cuts and industrial turmoil in the 70s and 80s, lean shop floors and managers are working together.
Well, there are very strong arguments for at least slowing the rate of tariff reduction. But I guess if you're in business, you don't stand around and wait for that to happen. It's not part of the policy of the present government, nor is it part of the policy of the Liberal National Coalition if they were elected. So the reality is you've got to get on and do business in the environment that has been created, and that is one of phasing down tariff protection.
Tonight's annual dinner will hear from outspoken author and historian on economic and social issues, Professor Geoffrey Blaney. Andrew Lobb reporting for NBN News.
Drayton Coal and ICI Explosives combined to set the new world record. At Drayton's open cut mine near Muswellbrook, the explosive Energen Gold was loaded using ICI's new bulk explosives blast loading system. Because of the size of the explosion, particular attention had to be paid to minimising vibration and noise levels. Then, last Friday, blast results exceeded expectations, with a vibration reading of less than 1 millimetre per second at the nearest residence. The previous record, 405 tonnes, set in Canada. Anthony Griffiths, NBN News.
Strictly Ballroom was honoured at the Cannes Film Festival. It's been nominated for 13 AFI awards, and although it's only had a limited release in Australia, it's already the #1 grossing film in the country. The movie is a romantic comedy based on ballroom champion Scott Hastings' desire to win the Pan-Pacific Grand Prix.
It's about somebody who breaks the rules and does what they want to do, and lives their life fearlessly. There's a quote in the film, "A life lived in fear is a life half lived," and that's what the film's about. It's about trusting and doing what you want to do.
This low-budget Australian-made film is expected to pack theatres in the United States and England when it's shown there later this year. It opens across New South Wales later this month. Jane Anderson, NBN News.
It rained overnight. Newcastle's international synthetic surface was soggy. It was like running on a scouring pad. In the girls' final, Tamworth's Oxley High fell to Crookwell. Oxley battled all the way, but did have problems getting out of their own territory. In the end, the weight of possession told. The final score 2-0. Meanwhile, the boys from Alstonville in the light strip went in as underdogs against the bigger Lithgow side in the boys' final, but they let the stick do the talking, weaving a path through the opposition and dominating the early stages. They scored first off a penalty corner. Alstonville looked to be getting the upper hand, but Lithgow turned it round, replying in kind from a penalty corner just minutes later. Alstonville staved off a late challenge to take the match and the cup 4-3. The scorers Ben Moss with 2, Chris Sharp and Tom Marshall. It rained overnight. Newcastle's international synthetic surface was soggy. It was like running on a scouring pad. The boys from Alstonville in the light strip went in as underdogs against the bigger Lithgow side, but they let the stick do the talking, weaving a path through the opposition and dominating the early stages. They scored first off a penalty corner. Alstonville looked to be getting the upper hand, but Lithgow turned it round, replying in kind from a penalty corner just minutes later. Alstonville staved off a late challenge to take the match and the cup 4-3. The scorers Ben Moss with 2, Chris Sharp and Tom Marshall. In the girls' final, Tamworth's Oxley High fell to Crookwell. Oxley battled all the way but did have problems getting out of their own territory. The final score 2-0.
The 67-page report from the Ombudsman, released earlier this week, looks at the performance of the Council, as well as the actions of both Cess Cotton and Warwick Armstrong, relating to the methods of seeking donations for the social club. The investigation has found that the conduct of the employees was wrong, but the Council has also come in for criticism. The report says, despite previous reviews of Council's management practices, there is still a lack of effective action on those previous reports, and many practices remain unchanged. Council suspended the employees over their actions, and Shire President Bevan O'Regan stands by this.
I've accepted that they've agreed that we acted correctly. Maybe they might have said that we've acted slightly overreacted. I don't believe that's the case. I don't believe we have overreacted. I believe that they have agreed that we acted correctly.
Outspoken critic of the Council, Councillor Ken Bailey, says now the findings are out, Shire President Bevan O'Regan should seriously consider his position in local government. Councillor Bailey says at next week's election for the Council President, Bevan O'Regan must stand aside for the good of the organisation and the Shire.
I think now that it is out, if, as I say, these people perhaps should really consider their future in local government. Well, I'd be very disappointed because I think considering the allegations that he has made and statements he's made about the widespread corruption within our Shire and the long investigation that has not unearthed any of that, I think it is time that he stood down as the Shire President and just perhaps someone else take his place.
Electricity generation produces half this state's greenhouse gas emissions, and according to Greenpeace, the planned corporatisation of the Electricity Commission won't guarantee any reduction in emission or gains in energy efficiency. Greenpeace commissioned the Environmental Defender's Office to prepare a report providing a policy framework. The cornerstone of the policy would be to break the power distribution monopoly and establish an independent regulatory body. Pacific Power would be split into 3 sections involved with the generation, development and operation of electricity transmission. Development and research funds would be directed toward efficient and renewable energy technologies. But Pacific Power General Manager Ross Bunyan has slammed Greenpeace, claiming the movement is out of touch with ongoing efficiency initiatives and the transition toward greenhouse-reducing technologies. It's licence renewal time and there's only one up for grabs. Better road links and communications have narrowed the gap between Newcastle and Sydney, and competition is fierce among air companies for the 28,000 commuters who choose to fly from here each year. By rule of thumb, the Department of Transport only allows 1 licence for a market this size, 2 for markets such as the North Coast with 40,000 air travellers. The Department's Air Transport Council visited Newcastle today to hear submissions from 4 companies. Those competing for the licence, the incumbent Eastern Airlines and the independently owned Hazelton, Oxley and Monarch companies, all promising improved passenger comfort, services and expansion of facilities. There's a heightened awareness too toward developing air links using Williamtown as a hub to North Coast and inland services. The greater throughput the better as far as Newcastle and Port Stephens councils are concerned. They're likely to share control of Williamtown after its $2.75 million upgrade and are banking on tourist traffic to land dollars in the area.
The fact that we've got 5 airlines vying for the route means that Newcastle should get the best service possible for this area. In addition to that, the Minister announced in June that the restrictions on charter operators has been lifted, so now charter operators can operate unrestricted into this area, which means that you could have charters coming in here 4 or 5 times a day, every day of the week if need be. So that would certainly open up the market, and particularly the tourism market for the Hunter region.
An army might march on its stomach, but an Air Force needs flying fuel tankers. 2 US KC-10s, the military configuration of the DC-10, are here to accompany elements of the US 35th Fighter Squadron back to their home base in Korea. The F-16 fighters have been here for 2 weeks doing battle with Williamstown FA-18s. To make the return trip, the 10 fighter aircraft will need to refuel in flight up to 7 times while travelling at about speeds of 600 kilometres an hour. Each tanker aircraft carries 200,000 litres of fuel and will in turn need to be refuelled by larger aircraft. The KC-10s are also the ticket home for more than 80 support personnel and their equipment.
Without us, they can't get anywhere in the world, and without us, they can't do their mission daily.
Smiles and group photos closed manoeuvres. The Americans fly out on Sunday.
People of Williamstown and especially Newcastle should be extremely proud of the pilots they have here flying their Hornets. These are some of the finest pilots we've come up against. Their training, as you know, is a lot like ours, but I can truly say that these are some fine professionals out here we've flown against, and it's been a joy, and we're hoping to come back.
The Australian Maritime Safety Authority is no longer prepared to pay for the upkeep of 8 lighthouses, which it says are no longer of use. Shipping companies are levied for maintenance of the lights, and with advanced shipboard electronic navigation systems, they say they no longer need the shore stations. Not so the thousands of small fishing and pleasure travelling the coast each year. The Minister for Industrial Relations, Senator Cook, has little sympathy for such mariners, saying they should invest in expensive but pinpoint accurate satellite positioning units or get out of the water.
Senator Cook should well take account of the fact that recreational boat users are equally entitled to use the waterways of Australia and deserve the infrastructure for safety purposes.
The outer Port Stephens light is one that could be left out in the cold. It's one the coastal community could ill afford to lose.
Maintaining a lighthouse at $12,000 a year is much cheaper than funding a $100,000 rescue attempt.
Public fundraising efforts have kept the light burning. Others are attempting to preserve the fire-ravaged lighthouse cottages and are determined to see the light maintained.
I think everyone realises that those lighthouses are absolutely essential for the maritime industry, the recreational vessel traffic and commercial shipping.
Knights fans take a one-eyed view to the world with the countdown to tomorrow's game. Houses, cars and buildings are draped with home team colours. It's a brave St George fan who'd show the Dragons colours in Hunter Street. But there he was. For most, the red and blue will do.
Go Knights!
I hope they win.
Footy fever became footy flavour for some. And they start young. The support shown by the students and teachers at Adamstown Primary should convert to a couple of tries at least.
Norths opened brilliantly, splitting the Knights down the left flank, and it was Makepeace who scored the first try of the day. Kelly Egan made the Knights pay for some slack defence again, and the Bears were on a roll of mammoth proportions. Stung into action, the Knights fought back hard in the first half, but couldn't break the defence of North Sydney. And soon after, soaking up all the pressure, turned to attack, with devastating results for a 22-0 lead at half-time to the Bears. Straight after the break, they were in again. But then Newcastle hit their straps for a while, Ainscoe's try a beauty. Moments later, David Smith was in and the Knights trailed by 10. However, with too many guns out wide, Egan put the Bears into the grand final with the last try of the day. And West Wallsend, the Northern Soccer champions, 2-1 winners over Wickham Park in the grand final today. Troy Morris getting the first goal after David Connor couldn't handle and the Bluebells were in front. They went further ahead just before a brilliant corner met with an equally stunning header from Cameron Wallace, and it was 2-0 at the break. Wickham Park Croatia pulled one back and went very close to securing another, only to be denied by a fine save from Craig Shanko. Final score, West Wallsend 2, Wickham Park 1.
Ahead of these competitors is a gruelling 22-kilometre bike ride up the Buckets. The mountain may be a tourist drawcard for Gloucester, but yesterday it was a testing ground for even the toughest triathlon competitor. We caught up with the riders as they headed down the other side. The leg was not only taking its toll on the riders, but also on their machines. John Wilkins from Sydney was an early casualty, but even without his bike he managed to finish the race in 26th position. Last year's winner, 29-year-old Brad Maund of Cardiff, led going into the canoe leg at Rocky Crossing. There was the odd competitor, though, who did it the hard way. Others found the going a little easier. Going into the run, Brad had a lead of 3 minutes, and he did his best to keep it that way. But this was not his strongest leg, and a young 19-year-old from Cronulla was closing the gap. And with just 2 kilometres to go, Grant Wilkinson made his move. Once back in Gloucester, the runners had to circle the sporting oval before crossing the finish line, a welcome sight for Grant and Brad. This was Grant's first triathlon, and you wouldn't believe his preparation.
Rollerblading, which is it's a good cross trainer for bike riding, so they say. I do it with a lot of triathletes in the Cronulla Triathlon Club, and I think that's what helped me.
First woman across the line was 28-year-old Karen Maund.
I took it fairly easy, but then I had a bad crash, which hurt my knee, and I wasn't sure how I was going to run, but I ran okay.
It's only the second year the race has been held, but it's growing in popularity. It offers a welcome change from the normal triathlon.
Narrabri Council has been plagued by controversy with the suspension of 4 senior staff officers and subsequent investigations by both the Ombudsman and the Department of Local Government. The council's critics outweigh supporters, with residents calling for a change at rallies and protest meetings. But Bevan O'Regan has been returned as Shire President by 2 votes. He was challenged by Councillor George Seville. The Deputy's job has again been filled by Councillor Doris Kelly. Again the position was challenged by George Seville, and again the ballot went against him, 7 votes to 5. Councillor O'Regan says he's relieved that he's been reappointed, and he plans to clear up the controversy within the Shire.
We have got a lot of work to do. We have got a lot of work to do in rural roads. And we have a lot of work to do in tidying up the 212 committee, and we have to virtually look at the Ombudsman's findings and get on with the job of running this Narrabri Shire.
Meanwhile, George Seville, who missed out on both jobs, hopes Councillor O'Regan can carry out his plans for the Shire.
This council seems to create a lot of publicity when with their differences, and I just hope that we can get on an even keel and do what's best for the ratepayers.
A rescue helicopter was called to a farm at Mangrove Mountain at about 9 this morning, where the Arimba man was working. He was removing corrugated iron from the roof of a chicken shed with another man when he fell. Tumbling more than 4 metres, the man landed on his head and suffered severe head injuries. He was treated by ambulance officers and a local doctor before being flown to Sydney by helicopter. Matthew White, NBN News.
With unemployment soaring to 17% in some northern New South Wales regions, the state government's push to create jobs through a $500 million boost in capital works spending has been welcomed by both industry and aid agencies.
What we're seeing is hopefully that will redress some of the public sector job losses that have occurred over the past year.
The government claims 6,000 public service jobs and a further 12,000 in the private sector will be created statewide by the budgetary increases in areas such as transportation, roads and hospitals. Just how much of that employment will flow north from Sydney, Treasury can't say yet. But opposition MPs in the Hunter believe the job creation figures are grossly inflated.
And let's face it, this is a government that just got rid of 20,000 public servants and have already continued the commitment to shed the state employment levels by another 8,500.
And the Labor MP is sceptical about just how much of the money listed in the budget for capital works comes from the state's coffers. $465 million have been allocated for roads in northern New South Wales, including this one that will link up with the Sydney-Newcastle freeway. But John Price says this road and others listed in the budget have been at least partially funded by the federal government. Coffs Harbour's ALP candidate Bruce Clark says his city has been forgotten by Macquarie Street, particularly in badly needed roads and hospital funding.
And until the state government starts recognising that this is a major growth area and that there needs to be special attention, people here will continue to suffer.
Tamworth City Council's General Manager Neil Lethlean is happier with his city's allocations, including money for a long-awaited sewerage scheme at Nimingar.
Certainly better than we did in the federal budget, and it's good to see that the state government is sympathetic to the regional areas and certainly to Tamworth.
The Lismore area is to get $50 million for public works, while Taree has been allocated $40 million. But the city's mayor would have liked to have seen more, especially for law and order. Scott Bevan, NBN News.
Now in its second year, StarQuest aims to identify talented performers between the ages of 10 and 18 in country New South Wales and the ACT. The main prize is a full scholarship worth up to $100,000 at Kinross Walleroy School in Orange, which specialises in fostering musical performance. Today, judges heard entries in the vocal and instrumental sections. Among the 100 entries, 17-year-old Greg Brown of Newcastle playing the baritone. Also performing on the clarinet, 15-year-old Rhiannon Rees from Newcastle. Newcastle heats for the dance and band sections will be held tomorrow. Earlier this morning, Teresa Boff won the senior vocalist section, while Melissa Freeman took out the juniors. These two, together with section finalists from 12 other regions, will compete in the grand final at Orange on October 24th.
The last time a blitz on seatbelt offences was carried out in the North region, more than 1,300 motorists were fined. But police are hoping this year the figures will drop. And Sergeant John Cook from Charlestown Police says many people are now aware of the dangers and the cost.
So I'd say the media coverage of COP at the moment is people are taking care and buckling up.
However, there are still those who don't get the message. Instead, they get a $94 fine and a 3-point penalty on their licence. The excuses are wide-ranging. 13% say they couldn't be bothered, 25% simply say they forgot.
Mainly it's just they forget, they're forgetful, oh geez I forgot, or I meant to put it on or something like that, but just forgetfulness. That's basically what it's all about.
The blitz will operate from northern Sydney to the Queensland border. It'll continue to midnight on Saturday. Matthew White, NBN News.
When Brett Allwood suffered a stroke at his Mannering Park home this week, an ambulance was less than 15 minutes away at Cooranbong. But the Cooranbong station could send only a single officer to the scene. The officer had to work on Mr Allwood alone at the house for 40 minutes before a neighbour offered to drive the ambulance to nearby Wyong Hospital. Mr Allwood later died. It's not the first time this year a single officer crew has relied on public help. In May, a Port Stephens man had to drive the ambulance while his dying mother was tended to by the lone officer, and similar incidents have occurred in Maitland and Lake Macquarie.
It's totally unacceptable both to the ambulance officers and the people of the Hunter Scott.
Mr Marlborough says the solution is simple. 60 more officers are needed throughout the Hunter to provide two-man crews at all stations. A two-man crew, he says, would have cut down the time it took in this latest incident in getting the stroke victim to hospital. The tragic irony in this incident is that Cooranbong is one of two stations in the Hunter that next month will receive more officers to provide two-man crews at all times. Mr Marlborough says what's preventing the installation of more two-man crews is Health Minister Ron Phillips, who wants more talks on so-called restrictive work practices.
In my mind, the Minister's office, who was directly responsible for the suffering that the people suffer through one-man ambulances.
Scott Bevan, NBN News.